Hello, everyone, and welcome to LinkedIn Live. This is Learn Plus. I'm Brenda Bailey Hughes, one of your LinkedIn instructors, and I'm delighted today to be here to talk about how to improve your listening. I truly believe that listening is a skill that can separate you from others, both in terms of your communication skills. It's one of the least taught but most important of our communication skills, most used of all of our communication skills. And it really just distinguishes you from others who don't grasp as much as you grasp, aren't attuned as you are, and can be a phenomenal way to distinguish yourself from others in the field. So welcome, so glad that you're here. As we're warming up, maybe you could pull up the chat and make some notes for me about where you're calling in from today, so we know where our guests are. And also maybe let me know. Let's all do a um, let's do a quick, just a sentence of a situation in which you would like to be a better listener. What's a situation in which you would like to be a better listener? So, for example, mine might be, I know, I would love to be, oh, good, Donna's here from Indiana, another Hoosier. That's where I'm calling in from. And our guest speaker today, Tatiana Kolovou, is from Alabama, too. Great, here we go. Hi from Minneapolis and Alabama and Accra and more Minnesota. Casablanca, welcome. So glad you're sales is why you want is why Alec is a situation in which he's going to get better as a manager. Good work meetings, just in general. I'm curious, Donna, are those work meetings face to face or are they remote work meetings? Is there a difference for you? We have people calling in from Seattle, Florida, Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Better listener as a partner. Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Martha's Vineyard. Oh, we think that is a vacation place. Are you working? Are you living in Martha's Vineyard? Um, a little bit of audio issue. We'll try to get that worked out with you, Taloya. From Egypt, welcome, Fatia. So good to see you. The Bay Area. We've got Miami on the line. More meetings. Adrian, are those face-to-face meetings? We have India represented. Better listener as a recruiter when interviewing candidates. Thank you so much. And I hope there are some potential job candidates online at some point that are also saying, I want to be a better listener when I'm interviewing, to listen to the details shared to me and from the folks in the meeting. Yeah, every situation when you don't agree with people. Ooh, thank you. Yes. Calling in from the Netherlands and the UK, Jersey, London. Virtual meetings with many stakeholders together. Yeah, and I think when we have, depending on the size of those meetings, those can be, a lot of people have their cameras off, so listening gets even harder, I think, when that's the case. We have New Guinea represented today and Ethiopia. Welcome, Samuel. So glad you're here. What situations do you find yourselves needing to be a better listener or wanting to improve your listener? Problem solving amicably. Yes, great. Jane Miller's here. A job candidate wants to improve her listening. There we go. Jane, so glad you're here. I think we've seen you in some of our courses. Oh, we have folks from strategy meetings. Yes. And I'm glad you wrote that, Argrian, because strategy meetings require a specific kind of listening that Tatiana and I are going to be talking about today. And if we bring the wrong kind of listening to a strategy meeting, that's actually one of my examples, is that we don't get the most out of it. Nicholas says all situations, but specifically with others that listen really well, and with my kids and spouse. Thank you, Nicholas, for bringing this home as well as into the workplace. I love it. Yes, yes, yes. Well, my guest today is Tatiana Kolovou, longtime friend and colleague. She teaches at the Kelley School of Business with me and has for over a decade. Tatiana and I also have developed a number of teaching and learning opportunities for executives and executives in education programs. And we have LinkedIn learning courses that I think some of you know us from having been in our courses. She and I co-authored the listening course that we're wanting to share with you about today. And so, Shelby, let's get Tatiana in here. And Shelby is, of course, behind the scenes. So if you're having any kind of technical difficulties, you can comment privately to Shelby, and the woman working all the magic behind the scenes will help you out. Tatiana, welcome. So glad
Thank
you're
here. You. Thanks for inviting me. This is so exciting that we have 1.25 million learners in our listening course, Brenda.
Isn't that amazing? That was a couple months ago. I don't even know what it is now. That was a few months ago.
And we haven't been asked to revamp that course. All I remember is stepping on my little stepping stool, because you all may not know this, but I'm a little shorter than Brenda. So that was my takeaway. But also,
and by a little, she means like 6 inches. So it's fairly noticeable when we're standing right next to you.
It's like this. Yeah. So the one memorable piece I have is, remember, we talk about inappropriate listening responses, all the things that happen in our head, interruptions. So we have fun recording that too. I'm so impressed to see what a global audience, Brenda. I mean, I think we should have Shelby create a map real quick of
I love it. I love it. Hey, look, Annie Atkinson in Fishers, Indiana is online. Tatiana, you know Annie.
Absolutely.
Annie is
Annie. Thanks for
dear
joining.
friend who has been listening to me since we were in 3rd grade. So great to see you. Jay is online. Jay, so glad to have you.
And Juan, our former student, is here as well. This is great. This is like a reunion. I love seeing all the different scenarios that our learners are talking about needing to be good listeners. And I have to admit, since we recorded that course, we probably could do a whole other course on listening in a virtual setting, because so much has changed, and not just with technology and how we use it, but also a lot of things have changed for us socially, in a way, how the workplace has changed, and so many other things influence how we do, and working from home and virtual and hybrid working and so on, that it does affect kind of where our mind goes when we're trying to be good listeners.
Absolutely. And some of our more recent research and studying has helped us evolve how we teach listening and how we think and practice listening to accommodate this new work world that we're all functioning in. So things are evolving for sure. Tatiana, I had the group sharing the situations where they find it most difficult to listening. One of mine is when students want to push back about their grades. Because instead of just listening with curiosity and trying to help them in a problem solving mode, I find myself getting defensive and wanting to defend the grade that I gave, that they earned in my mind. So I know that's an area for me where when that happens, I want to be a better listener. Do you have one?
And when that happens, usually when the rubber hits the road, when it's the end of the semester and someone is arguing as well as defending their grade. Could you share any advice on talking to a person can improve, become a better listener in person? I wanted to add mine. It has to do with emotion. I think it's easier to be a better listener when you're less emotionally attached. But I was thinking of where it's hard to be a good listener is in a workplace situation when people don't fulfill their promises. So we agree that we're going to do something a certain way, and there's good reasons why things happen, but then people don't do what they promised they would do, and then it falls back on your lap. So listening at that point of why they can't fulfill their promise, I have a hard time being a good listener and being an empathetic listener at that point, because the excuses at some point are legitimate.
Right. Well, and I think it's important. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's important to acknowledge that good listening doesn't mean a lack of accountability. Even if we're listening with empathy, it's finding that balance of high accountability and high empathy. So yes, please, listeners, don't take away from this conversation that we think you should all go home, listen, and not hold your direct reports or your colleagues accountable. That is not the message of the day, for sure.
And be a doormat that everyone walks over, and you end up getting more work lapped on you. I'm seeing so many comments here.
We've got great questions coming in. Should we just jump in with some questions here for a minute? And then I want to think through some of the different types of listening,
Yeah.
because I think that's something that people don't even understand sometimes, is that listening is not all the same depending on the scenario and the situation. So when a talking person can improve to
So
become a
while
better
you're doing
listener.
that,
So
I
you're
want
an
to,
extrovert, you're a talker, but you
I
want to
know.
become a better. I'm going to shut up and let Tatiana, the extrovert, speak
So
to that one.
I knew this would come up. First, I want to say that listening is not, it cannot always be high impact, all in, focused. It would be exhausting to do that on a regular basis. I would say it increases in importance based on what's happening, but it also depends on your own energy level and your ability to be an intentional listener. So in our course, at times we talk about finding when you're better listening time of day, month, quarter, week, whatever, and be very attuned. If Brenda says I have something important to discuss, I'm going to find a time where I'm not completely, I'm going to say, this is not the best week. Can we schedule it? Can this wait for this time? I want to give it the time of day. I usually take a lot of notes. So as I sit here, I've made notes, I stop, I prepare, and during a time I need to be a good listener, I find myself writing down the words that I hear, of being able to keep me on track. And another piece of advice that I use, because I visually tend to get distracted, or I am very attuned and I pick up on things that are happening. I was just this past weekend in a wedding, and it was a very terrible acoustically, but I was meeting people, older people in the family that were important. I position myself so I can hear better if I'm looking into a wall and I'm not visually distracted. So taking away visual distraction, and physically in a business meeting, taking notes virtually or in person, helps me stay on track.
I think that's a great idea. Introverts kind of already sort of filter out some of that and focus in a bit more. And so for our talkers in the group, and then what's your Greek uncle's name that says we have two ears and one mouth? There's a reason.
Epictetus, that's his name. He was a Greek philosopher that said, we have two ears and one mouth. We should, follow the same ratio as we listen more than we speak.
But that's actually been helpful to me in meetings to stop and think, am I talking more than I'm speaking? Am I listening at least twice as much? Or another guideline for our talkers in the group is the three then me guideline has been really
Yeah.
helpful to me. I'm in a meeting, I've spoken until three more people have spoken. It's not my turn. And that helps me put the listening hat on, I think, a little bit. Serge points out that hearing and listening, some people get those mixed up. Hearing is just a physiological process. It happens whether we're working at it or not. Listening is a skill set. It is something that requires processing and intentionality and purpose. So you're
Yeah.
not listening if you're just in the room. That's hearing. Listening, as he points out, is a really different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Renee points out, can we take a poll? How many folks on this call are multitasking right now and not listening as well? But they want to be here. They're the extroverts. They're like, I don't want to miss. I want to be part of this, and I will go ahead and listen. Renee, I would say you probably, some people are. If there was an exam after this that you had to pass, you probably wouldn't be multitasking, right? I would think so. But if it's, you want to sort of be in the conversation and catch some other things, if you are doing some task that is, I would say, very low skill, it would be okay as long as you don't have to weigh in as well or have to be part of the conversation in a specific way.
Yeah, so
Juan
true.
Carlos has a question. He's raising his hand with an emoji. I love it.
He's got two former instructors in the room. Of course, he's going to raise his hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Drop in your question
Drop
too.
in your question. Hussein's got the reminding us not to be planning our answer while we're listening. I
Mm,
think a great, great
mm.
strategy. So hard to do, but so important.
Yeah, yeah.
What about people that take up a lot of airtime? They don't let others talk.
Oh, I think maybe, I don't know. Is this a situation where
It's a Teams meeting and not
You
letting
need
others
to,
talk, but still ensuring they keep it concise.
yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind to me, first of all, the fact that you have keyed in on that being an important component is so important because the research coming out from Amy Edmondson on psychological safety,
Mm,
one of the primary attributes that teams with psychological safety experience is equal talk times.
mm,
So when you're noticing in this team meeting that someone is dominating the conversation, that's creating a culture where psychological safety is
mm,
not going to manifest itself. So first of all, kudos to you. Good for you for noticing that inequity of conversational time and recognizing it as problematic for your team. Then I think establishing like the three then me guideline before it's before you're in the middle of it. So maybe you start your team meetings with an agenda and the agenda goes out even before the meeting and then comes up again. And the agenda can have guidelines at the bottom, conversational guidelines, three
mhm.
then me. So that then if someone just keeps pulling the conversation back to them, it's a little less personal to say, oh, and let's not forget our three then me guideline.
Yeah.
Or to even give it a little, oh, thank you, Parth. We've heard from you today. I'd love to hear from Christos. You can do some of that cueing, orchestrating, facilitating, even if you're not the facilitator of the meeting, but you're noticing some of that inequitable talk time. I think we owe that to our
And
colleagues.
Brenda, collecting data on this is important and some self-awareness. Anymore, we record a lot of our meetings. Going back and hearing if you interrupt, if you paraphrase, if you are taking your turn nicely, give yourself some feedback. Just lately, I was giving my students the tool on Udly that is an AI tool that allows, or you can practice your speaking, but now they have it so you can enact it into your uh, meeting in your specific whatever. It collects your data and everyone else's and shows how much pausing you do, how many fillers that you use. But that would be great to collect data that you can act upon from a team presentation. You have a tool that you
Yeah.
use for
I
your.
do. It's called a communication audit, and it's really just a simple Excel form. But after a meeting, I use it both when I'm looking at teams in the executive world, but I have my student groups do this as well. I should do a whole LinkedIn Learn on this and make that the Learn Plus
Yeah,
part. But essentially, I track every time someone speaks and then categorize that what they contributed. Was it encouraging? Was it giving information? Was it asking for information? And this has been so enlightening to some teams when they come in telling me, oh, yes, we have equal talk time and we're a super encouraging team, or yeah, we really love to challenge each other's ideas. And then I show them this objective data at the end of their meeting after I
yeah,
do the audit. No one has played a devil's advocate or pushed back on anybody's ideas. First idea out, that's what they accept. And there's no encouraging. It's just people kind of going along to get along. Or someone spoke 60% of the time and every other participant collectively only spoke 40% of the time. It's really an eye-opening exercise. Yeah.
absolutely. We have so many comments. I've lost the
Yep.
ball here.
Well, how do
I
you
guess,
successfully bounce back and forth between talking and listening? Thank you, Parth.
yep, yep. How do you successfully bounce back? Again, Parth, I try very much to take notes. But back to what a comment somebody else said is to an agenda of what are we talking about? What do we need to bring to the table? Having a chance to gather your thoughts, especially in days where you have 5 or 6 meetings, knowing what the scope is, what the goal is, what we should bring, what we should think, and being prepared to be in the context is super helpful. I think meetings that get distracting and unproductive are ones where it's a free for all. And on top of that, you layer in some issues that are sticky and conflict ridden, and then that makes for pretty bad listening.
Yeah. Adrian
Oh,
talked about
Alec, you're
it's
so
not enough
sweet.
to just listen. We've got to listen and care. And that's a certain kind of listening that we'll talk about. Absolutely. Gian, thank you. Does anyone have the urge to fill the silence when you talk with an introvert? I think if we can get over that urge to fill, it liberates us and our conversational partners from what several of you have mentioned, which is that need to create your answer instead of listening. If we know I can just listen. And then if there's a quiet pause and everyone's comfortable with that pause, then I can be crafting my response. But you're right, you're so right that it requires more comfort with a little bit of silence between conversational partners. Love it.
Can I add in here too, though, silence doesn't have to be sort of, especially in virtual meetings, I don't have to just sit there. It looks like the Wi-Fi dropped. I think you can listen non-verbally without being distracting. Also, you don't want to be doing this the whole time, or you can have the silence and then say something that says, I thought about this and I'm bringing it to the table. You can pause and use silence. But again, unless you've studied yourself and seen what it is, and maybe having someone coach you to point out some things, you may be doing things that are distracting or that are difficult to read. I know many people that in some cultures, dropping your eyesight and crossing your arms and looking as if you're sleeping is in a deep listening state. And in our Western culture, that would be considered, well, you took a nap while I was doing my most important presentation too. So that wouldn't be necessary. So the fact that you're silent, and if you use some good nonverbals, can point to good listening as well.
Yeah. Donna talks about she does mindless physical activities to help her listen. And I know that Tatiana talks about how extroverts need that kinesthetic sort of movement to actually help them focus. So I think that's a great strategy, but I'm going to put a caveat on it though.
Mhm.
That's great when you're in a setting like this and we can't see that you're folding laundry.
Yeah.
If you're in a conversation and even though you know you're a better listener because you're doodling or folding laundry or
Yeah.
knitting or whatever, the speaker needs to see
Mhm.
you showing all those nonverbal attributes of a good listener.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have a funny stories about talking to different people who are multitasking, and I'm like, you know what, I'll come back and talk when you can actually listen. And then they can paraphrase back exactly what I said. So I know they were listening, but my common response is, if you don't look like a listener, it doesn't count.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
yeah. So
right.
Donna, good for non-visuals. Go ahead, Tatiana. What were you going to say?
I want to add that, how sometimes we say in difficult conversations, it may be better to say, let's just go on a walk and talk this out. When you're doing something like walking and not looking at a person in their eyes, maybe sometimes I can listen better if it's just audio versus audio and video. To me, as an extrovert, I get distracted by trying to read all of the cues that are given to me, depending on the conversation, where I just want to listen to the content, or maybe say I'm listening to an analyst call. I don't need to see the CEO speaking. I want to just listen to the content. Or if it's something that's very specific with instructions and details and things that matter, I don't want to have all the different other layers involved as well.
I wonder if that, Tatiana, explains some of the intriguing empathy literature that's always been a bit counterintuitive to me, which is that we can actually feel more empathy. People rate higher on
Mhm.
scales of empathy when they take a conversation by audio only. And so I
Mhm.
wonder if it's to your point that we rule out some of the almost too much information from from the visual
Yeah.
cues, and that allows us to just sort of sink into the conversation a little better and increase our empathic responses.
Well, think of how popular podcasts are. I mean,
Yeah.
there's podcasts are a lot more popular than LinkedIn Lives that people will go run tomorrow and listen to this. I do think, plus they're a lot more difficult on the lives. I know that LinkedIn is working on audio only. There's something to be said with that. Of people may want to listen while they're driving, or they may
Sure.
want to follow along while they're doing something else. Because we were going to talk about this. There's different purposes of listening, there's different intentions. And we talked about the most energy consuming type of listening is listening for empathy and emotion and to be with that person. But on a day-to-day basis, we're doing a lot of strategic listening and detail listening and interpretation listening, right?
Yep. In fact, Shelby, I think you've got some slides. We'll show you 5 of the most common purposes of listening.
Yeah.
And then we're going to ask you to self-evaluate here. Which one you think is your superpower? Which of these 5 types of listening is what you're really good at? And you use it all the time, and you know that when you're in that mode, you are on. You've got it. And then the second slide we're going to show you in the polls after we explain these 5 just briefly is which one is your kryptonite, your
Yeah.
weakness, the thing that hurts Superman. So the first one, of course, is recalling details. So Tatiana, when do you need to recall details? What are situations where that's the
Instructions.
purpose?
I'll give you an example. This past weekend, we were at a family wedding, and I got called on to be on the buffet or the setup, the dinner setup committee, because it was in a museum. So we had to go in and put the chairs in a certain way, the tablecloths. There was so much detail that I went through the instructions. I was listening intently, took so many notes, had sketches. So you don't want to mess that up. You don't want an upset
Right.
bride. I was listening very intently. Absolutely.
It was a wedding weekend for both of us. I
That's
was at
right.
my own daughter's wedding, officiating at my
Which
daughter's
I
wedding,
missed because
which
of our
Tatiana
niece.
missed. Yes, that's
Yeah.
all right. Family first. So that's recalling details. Be thinking, are you really good at that? Is that kind of your superpower when it comes to listening? Can you walk out of hearing instructions like Tatiana just did and really have it all down pat? Or is your superpower understanding the big picture?
Yeah.
So now imagine that same scenario where Tatiana's like, yeah, I get the general idea. I'm supposed to put some chairs up somewhere and some food somewhere. That's the big
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
Then you would have had Bridezilla on your hands if you had
Yes.
pulled that, I think.
Absolutely.
When
So
do you best listen for the big picture? What are some scenarios?
the big picture in this scenario too was what our niece did really well. She said, we have a museum space and we're using both parts of the hall. One side is going to need to be cleared for a dance floor. So immediately I knew what the purpose of this was. I could kind of envision the guests coming in as she described it. So I personally need to know, and this is good if you're going to be a good direction giver, to may say, the reason that we're doing the sort of the big picture, talk about the forest before you get into the details and the trees, because some people need that to be engaged and to be drawn in. So the big picture is where you would sort of step us back and not worry as much about the details and think of the why of something is happening.
Right. And I think our listener who said, I need to up my game, my listening game in strategy meetings. This is your purpose. Understanding that big strategy is by default big picture. Now,
Mhm.
if they're starting to work through some of the implementation of a strategic direction, you might be getting into the recalling details. But I think that's one of the mistakes that we can make is being so far into the details that we miss stepping back and saying, you know what, right now, this is about the big picture. And that
Well,
makes the listening
yeah.
go a little awry.
And if I may add, many of us are detailed people, and we immediately start asking detailed questions instead of just letting the big picture come out and be specific. And we don't want to get distracted by that. So how we listen is also, we need to, as you start to think, what's my superpower and what's my weakness?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, Tatiana, you'll remember this too. Our school went through a branding campaign a few years ago, the university where she and I teach, the Kelley School of Business, specifically within that university. And when the marketing team came in to explain to all of the faculty, so this is a big meeting, hundreds of faculty members are there, and they're explaining the big picture.
Yeah.
But you could tell the detail-oriented folks started asking, what date are we going to do X?
The
And
accounting
what's
department, you
going
can
to
say
be,
it.
what kind of logo is going to be on the book bags? And you could just, other people were so frustrated by that need for detail because it was so premature. We were still
Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
at the big picture stage. That's the second one. The third strategy, and I love this skeptical baby
Yeah.
face because evaluating the content
Yeah.
is that third one. And it's interesting because you mentioned, Tatiana, that empathy takes a lot of energy and it requires this sort of emotional
Yeah.
connection. And I think there's a lot of time and energy spent. I teach listening empathetically, so I certainly understand that that's an important skill. And we're always talking then about listening without judgment. And then, boom, here we are saying some days, you know what? You need to listen with judgment. You
Yeah.
need to be an evaluative mindset.
Yeah.
So, what are the contexts? I know there are a lot of times when we're telling people stop the judging. When should we be saying start the judging?
I guess when decisions need to be made, I mean, think about all the decisions we had to make based on the information that we had during COVID, sending your kid to school, not sending. An announcement comes out, you have to listen to that, teacher parent meeting that is had and make a decision based on the information that you have. I can say, based on some situations, this may not be as specific, or you're deciding which way who to follow. You've
Yes,
got
yes,
directions coming in two places and you have to support one versus another. You're being pitched, or you have to
yes.
decide. Or on the side, in the business school, I guess we hear a lot of judging business competitions. You do have to decide one or the other, and you really intently have to listen to content. This is when I'm a judge in a competition, I have a hard time sometimes being distracted by really good delivery of a team, but I see that the argument had Swiss cheese holes all over it. If I listen for the content, it was not there. So I need to know myself and know where to be focused. So listening for content is, I would say, decision making and times where you do have to wear that hat.
In your personal life, anytime, or professional life, anytime someone's trying to sell you something, a friend
Yeah.
of mine showed up the other day with a little bag of caramel popcorn and said, I don't know if I should say who the nonprofit was, but it was the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts got him. A cute little Boy
Oh,
Scout
those are
knocked on the
expensive.
door, and he spent
Yeah,
$25 on this
I
little bag
know.
of
I
popcorn. And I
know.
said, "What happened to you?" And I think it was just a great example of not evaluating the content. That bag was not worth. And but instead, sort of this empathetic listening got the best of him, and maybe
Yeah.
it was a great decision to support a nonprofit or
Yeah.
a kid in the neighborhood, whatever. But
Or
not evaluating content for sure.
when we're getting pitched things on social media, anytime, I'm sick and tired of my Instagram feed because it's all these pitches for different products and things. And at times I bought the non-scratch pads for the cats on the couch, or I'm doing a terrible job looking what the price and it's just so easy. But the people selling us this are assuming we're not evaluating content. We're just
Right.
going by the pitch. Yeah. So,
Agreed. Agreed. This one was the one you mentioned, this idea of attuning to subtle cues,
yes.
really zooming in on those nonverbals. And I think you do such a good job of this. In fact, one of the
Mm,
reasons I love tag teaming with Tatiana is we can come out of a meeting and I will have the big picture down. I'm like, here is where this is heading. And she'll say, did you notice that John thought this about that? And I'm like, he never said that. She goes, oh no, but I was watching him. You are so
yeah.
good at
Yeah.
noticing those. How have you trained your brain to sort of attune? What are
I
you noticing?
back to getting distracted by visual cues. I think I get used to kind of looking around. I caught the family wedding, back to that this weekend. A family member that got very emotional, and was upset, and nobody else saw it. And I was attuned to it. I don't know what it was specifically, but I was able to bring it up and it was fine. But again, I don't know. Maybe I come from a different culture, and in Greece, a lot of the nonverbals are exaggerated even more. There's just a lot that's being said without words. So I would say I've been trained with a lot of that, so I can read through the lines in a way. But again, some of that is goes to waste in a different culture where I haven't been exposed this much, and I can't read some of the subtle cues. I may miss them, like you said. I'm not sure. It's just something that's a little bit more intuitive for me.
Sam had written that very question. How do I get better at understanding these nonverbals?
Yeah,
And I think some of our tips for other learners have been things like practice reading the room. It's just second nature to Tatiana, but Sam, you and I may need to make it an actual practice. So I've caught myself on meetings that I'm going into. I make a personal note to myself on the meeting that says, notice nonverbals. And that little reminder, then when I walk out of the meeting, I ask myself, can I tell how each person in the room was reacting to certain items on the agenda? And
yeah.
if I can't even tell you that Tatiana was in the room, much let alone that how she felt on a certain agenda item, then I that's a good reminder to me, a heads up to me that I wasn't reading the room. I wasn't taking that time to practice reading
And
the room.
Sam, this is terribly difficult in virtual meetings. And then you add cultural differences on top of that. It's impossible. Where in a way you need to have seen probably the person interact in another setting or spend a little time with them so you can actually read them a little better. It becomes very, very challenging as we say that. By the way, by the end, I shouldn't give it away, but we are going to give you some good resources for working on some of your bigger weaknesses that you may have. And Sam, that includes that question.
Well, and Sam, I'll tell you what's on, yeah, spoiler alert, but one of the tips on that tip sheet is to watch your television with the volume turned down. And so
Mhm.
you're forced to just see the nonverbals. And then as you're watching those nonverbals, you try to figure out what's the storyline? What are the power dynamics? What are the relational dynamics? Who
Mhm.
feels what? And then watch it again with the volume on and see how well that you did. There's also a facial expressions quiz
Oh,
put together by Berkley, and if you just type facial expressions quiz, I think you'll find it. And just practicing with that quiz as a way of training yourself to start noticing some of the very fine and subtle facial expression cues that communicate different emotions could be really
you know,
helpful.
we should ask our friend Ray, who ran hundreds of focus groups. Isn't that what the researchers do behind the two-way mirror in a focus group? They're looking at how people are reacting and what they're saying. And it's easier to do if you step away versus having to be a participant, because then you would be awkwardly looking at everyone and taking notes.
But that might solve two problems. We said some of us are talking too much and we need to listen more. So if we're stepping back just a smidgen to
Yeah,
quit talking, maybe we would attune a little bit more. I
yeah,
love it. So
absolutely.
attuning to not subtle cues. And then
Antenna.
that fifth behavior, and I think Jay, this speaks to your question a little bit about you try to imagine their situation so much that you almost get lost in it. And that
Yeah,
is this idea of listening with empathy. So
yeah.
Tatiana, any thoughts on listening empathetically?
I got myself into a sticky situation over the week where I made a comment on social media on LinkedIn about I met the Greek Prime Minister and
Okay.
made a comment praising, saying they've done a really good job in the last 3 years. I didn't realize, and I took that part of my comment because I was making a statement on how I felt about the work that this administration did. I had so many negative comments. You can check them out if you want. My students were talking about them today. And a lot of it comes from I don't live in that country and I don't live and I don't walk in the shoes of the day-to-day challenges that people in that country may have. And it took a lot. I mean, initially my first reaction was, "Oh my gosh, really seriously?" Of course I had to talk it out. I didn't bother you, Brenda, because you were in wedding land as well. But I really had to process it through. And then I stopped and said, I shouldn't have done this in the first place. It's my fault. I shouldn't have made this statement. I can see that from that perspective and the points that these people are making in their comments, they have a point, and I need to honor that. And I need to not start and pick a fight and understand that there are different viewpoints, especially when it comes to politics.
Yeah. Yeah. Politics. Yeah. A lot of hot topic subjects.
But
Thank you.
you probably we both have kids. I mean, this empathy thing as a parent, quite often you jump into, let me fix it, let me solve it. And empathy is just the saying, this sounds horrible. I'm really sorry you're going through it.
Right.
Practice some of this wording. Some of
Right.
you attention followers following the details are the ones that in this case, when you have to be empathetic, will actually try to fix. And that's when you just need to try to envision how it would feel to go through the situation and not take any action.
Right. Right. All right. So you've heard the 5. Now let's see if you can pull in. We are curious to see
Ooh.
which one is your superpower. Are you great at recalling details, understanding that big picture, evaluating? So many of our listeners, Tatiana, are talking about how they are catching themselves listening, planning their responses.
Yeah.
Attuning to subtle cues is winning. Look at that so
Well,
far.
I
With
would
only
argue,
one polar though. There, we'll give people a minute here.
yeah. I'm reading through some of this, a
Yeah,
lot of
me
notes.
too.
Someone, Fernanda, thank you. It took a little bit to get myself there. Maybe this is not refreshing fast enough, but I also think you have a very global audience here today, Brenda. And when you have to train yourself, these learners of ours are from, they consume information from all different parts of the world, and that's going to happen for sure. Superpower now is more empathy. Okay. With
Yeah.
second one being attuned. No one is good at details. What's going on? Very nice. Oh my goodness. We are going to try to respond to some of these big picture.
Mhm.
Yep.
Need help with some friends who talk 95% of the conversations, Donna. You need a 3 than me rule, even just for your friendship groups, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting here is that think as a good communicator, what are people feeling is their strength and what are their weaknesses, and play to that. Or maybe start your next team meeting and saying, I attended a cool listening presentation or live, and they talked about this. What do we think? So try to kind of figure that out.
Yeah.
I can recall details well. I'm terrible at reading the room and empathizing. Eric, honestly, that becomes better with an interpreter at first. Literally, having a person that you debrief after and you think, what do you think Brenda was thinking? Or how do you think she feels? What did you read? A lot of your skills will improve by being supported by others as well. Try not to become biased, but try to become more attuned.
Yeah. Kenny, I love your suggestion. He's been repeating back just a few of the key words that someone's been saying, which is a great response when you're trying to show that you have been listening and that you've been listening empathetically. So I'm not fixing it. I'm not making the conversation suddenly about myself. It's
Yep.
still just them.
Yep.
And then it allows them to continue or to elaborate a little bit if they want to.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we've not, there's still a voting. I would say saying, I'm trying to understand, tell me more about this, or you must be so frustrated. What did you do next? So interjecting with some of these clarifications really is a good way to connect with your listener versus uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. In
Right.
fact, if there's no visual to that, you probably think they are folding laundry.
Right, right. Okay, so we've had a number of you poll in here with empathizing being our clear winner, understanding
Empathizers,
the
great.
picture, attuning to subtle cues, recalling details, and evaluating the content. Interesting. So then what's your listening kryptonite? What's your listening weakness? We'll give you a second to pull in on that while we take a few more of these awesome questions. How do we deal with the power dynamics that are not in our favor? Chantel, in a listening role, I think I think we have to be savvy about power dynamics. And sometimes that means that we do listen more than we speak and that we listen more attentively. We have some research that was published in the Harvard Business Review talks about the nonverbal cues that people associate with being very competent and very powerful. And there are things like looking away when you're listening, which is a power move. But I think being attuned to that and knowing what your goal is it to show more power in a relationship or to show deference for the power players in the room? And then making sort of intentional decisions from that. Great question.
Also, in the power differential too, saying, Brenda, what I heard you say was this, or using what I heard, or the way that you're describing this reminds me of, is always sort of piggybacking or paraphrasing or using some of what the person heard, and in a way building that rapport in the conversation.
Yeah. Hey, there we've got a neck and neck race here on the weakness.
Oh no.
Recalling details and evaluating content. Well, we'll give them a
Yeah.
couple tips for recalling details and evaluating content.
For me,
Well, either, yeah. So I just said let's give them a couple of tips for that, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about an exercise we use when we're teaching others how to listen better. So recalling details, I think one of our favorite tips there is listen to something really boring and detail centric, like watch the weather report, the 7-day weather report, or listen to a really excruciatingly boring lecture, but force yourself to capture some of those details by taking a few notes. Rena in the comments has pointed out that if she gets so involved in taking every word down, she starts to lose the big picture for the little picture. So finding that balance of how many notes will keep me attuned without losing track of everything I'm trying to say.
The big picture, I listen to radio on a regular basis when I get ready in the morning. I don't watch it on TV. I don't, again, too much visual distraction. And there's anymore, if you watch TV, there's a 3-ring circus of information going on, stripping in the bottom and flashing and
Oh,
all of this.
yes.
I like radio because it kind of brings me, because what are the top things that I need to know? And it's not reading something, but it allows me to kind of know what's going on in Ukraine and what did Russia do today and what's the market doing and locally what's happening. So that kind of cues me in. I'd say in the details at times, use some of the electronic hacks that we have. So I may leave a meeting and then say, Siri, remind me tomorrow to do this. So I don't have to burden my head, the hard drive that's full half the time, with the remembering something, or Siri, make note this, this, and this. So I may use some of those hacks to allow myself to pay attention more to the big picture. Or heck, I'm a very aggressive note taker, card, post-its, everything to help remember things specifically.
Yeah. And then that one did end up winning. Recalling details was a 35%, evaluating content 24%. So any tips on it? Yeah.
So practice recalling the details, specifically to practice listening to the news and saying what was the percentage that was called for. But I'd say don't burden your brain as much. Just take good notes. And I like good pens. I like new clean notepads. Treat yourself, or I would say bribe yourself into doing a good job keeping notes.
The Learn Plus, the plus is always a training tactic or a coaching tool you can use for people who might ask you, how do I get to be a better listener? One of the exercises Tatiana and I have had great luck with is we call it the listening triangle or the listening triad. We break people into groups of 3, and one person is assigned to be the speaker, one the listener, one the coach/observer. And then they rotate that role. So there are 3 rounds. We ask the speaker to tell a story from their life that evoked a strong emotion. And we don't dictate the emotion. It can be joy, happiness, fear, grief, but some emotion. And they tell that story to the listener. So right off the bat, the listener has to choose the appropriate kind of content. And obviously, this is an empathetic type of listening that's being called for. If I'm telling Tatiana some emotional story, oh, this happened at my daughter's wedding this weekend, and oh my goodness, she was so beautiful, and we're so happy for her and her new husband, and having this new son-in-law is great. And then if Tatiana responds with something like, what time did the wedding start? What
Yeah.
did they serve at the dinner? She's missed the whole
Where
point
did
if
you
she
find
does.
the dress? I want to know more about the dress.
Right. What was the designer of the dress? Where did she buy the dress? Like, oh my goodness, you've missed it. So, um, so knowing that they should be in empathetic listening mode and picking that, and then monitoring their nonverbals so that they're mirroring some of the emotion from the speaker themselves. That's a great tip, unless your speaker is angry and irate with you and you're trying to de-escalate a situation, then you don't want to mirror, obviously, the nonverbals. But otherwise, mirroring some of those nonverbals and then providing an empathic response, one that does what a few of you have commented on about saying a few of the words back, summarizing in your own words, not just the content, the facts, but the emotion.
Yeah.
So Tatiana, after the wedding, might say something like, oh, Brenda, you sound so filled with joy from the big wedding weekend. And then I know she was not just hearing me talk about the wedding, but feeling with me about my daughter's wedding this
Yeah.
weekend. Yeah.
Remember that if I say, that sounds so cool, that's the equivalent when someone talks about their pet dying and I see this thoughts and prayers. I mean, that's so, I would say, superficial. Try to add some emotion to what you say, or even if you write something, try to make it a little bit substantial to show that emotion, as we
Yeah.
say. And that third
Great.
person in the
Yep.
triangle is looking for nonverbals as well, not just writing that down specifically.
And then that observer role is really important because whoever gives you feedback on your nonverbals and your listening responses, we never get that
Yeah.
feedback. So it's both great for the observer as a training mechanism for him or herself to see and really identify those tactics, but then also to be given that kind of feedback is just so valuable. And then, like I said, we rotate. Next person is up as the speaker, new listener, new observer, and we just rotate through 3 times. It's great. Tatiana, you promised
Yeah.
us some goodies at the
Yes.
end, and I think
So
Shelby's got those goodies for us. But tell
Shelby
us
is
about what we're
going to
getting here.
share each of the 5 types of listening. Will have, if you linked that as your biggest weakness, we send you to reading the extremely exciting microwave manual while you listen to your favorite music, and you have to recall, what do you do if you've put silverware in the microwave and it blows up. So anywhere you have to pay close attention, we give you some tips on how to strengthen or how to improve the weaknesses that you may have. But then we take it to the next level, because we really believe that repetition of an activity makes you adopt that as a better habit. And we give you a 30-day challenge, right, Brenda? That you
Right?
can print out, and we didn't make it electronic. You got to print it out. So you got to fill it out, and you have to pick one thing that you're going to do on a daily basis. So if it's the details that you're focusing on, try to listen to the news and tell your spouse or your child or someone at work what the weather is going to be tomorrow. Pay attention to the weather, or do any of those specific things that we said in many different contexts. So
That's right.
tips and a challenge that we have for you.
Yeah. So, do we have those for our listeners? I think they were going to be links in the chat. Shelby's probably behind the scenes working like crazy to get those up and ready for you. And if they don't come out in the chat today, we'll definitely post them in the show notes. So if you
Sure.
just come back to the show, they'll be the first comment. We'll pin those at the top so you can find those.
And if we didn't get to all your questions, goodness, I look at the clock, we're at 54 minutes. We will go back into the feed and we will answer those specifically too. So don't feel like we ignored you.
We're so glad that you were here. So grateful for your participation, your engagement. It's always fun to chat with all of you. Tatiana, when's your next live? Do you have one lined up and ready to
I
go?
do on Thursday.
Oh, good.
Thursday, I am following up my Stronger newsletter, and maybe Shelby can drop it in. Oh, I didn't promise you that. Talking about strategies for you to be stronger and improve your performance in the workplace. I talk specifically about resilience strategies, and the one and only Gemma Lee Roberts is going to join us in my live on Thursday at noon this week. So don't miss that out. I just saw her in New York. We had great conversations. I'm going to pull tips from her book, Mindset Matters on Resilience. She is the master of resilience and studies it. So I'm really excited. So thanks for asking. I could fit that in.
So glad. That sounds awesome. I teach at 1, so I'm going to have to watch it on the record instead of live. But I'm so
No
glad you're
worries.
bringing Gemma in. And I'll be back live with you in October with my dear colleague Anna Deeds, who's going to be talking about after action reviews, a way to totally just shoot the performance of your teams up in all sorts of new ways, and a really fun activity that she uses when she teaches with after action, and when she teaches how to do after action reviews or uses those. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We're so delighted to have you in our chat. Take care.
Thanks, Brenda.
Bye, Tatiana. Thanks for being here.
Bye, everyone.